Indie Metal!
Crab. What? Today we'll be taking a look at Crypt of the NecroDancer, a game with a story so incredibly tragic that none of the characters have changed their clothes since. And I've gotta tell you, that tailoring children's clothes for a fully grown woman could not have been easy. So, it was... one person died. Candace's father, Dorian, has been away searching for the magical golden loot for the past 2 years. So against the wishes of her uncle, who has a shovel for a hand by the way, she goes searching for him. And then she died. That normally doesn't work. Crypt of the NecroDancer is a rhythm-based roguelike, meaning that you, as well as the enemies, move to the beat of the music rather than it being purely turn-based or more action-focused. Because apparently that's an idea you can have, and one that I am now going to have to explain, and that's just great. So let's see. I guess in a way it technically still does use the standard roguelike turn system where you and the enemies attack at the same time, but instead of you dictating when that happens, you and the enemies have to act to the beat of the music. How does that affect things? Well, really well, actually. Basically what it does is it speeds up the... I want so badly to say tempo, but if I start with the music puns now, they're never gonna stop. It speeds things up. In a way, it's similar to the active time battle system for Final Fantasy IV. Or 2. Well, actually, it was in all the good ones after the one I'm referring to, so that doesn't clarify anything. Anyways, it's similar in the way that they're both still technically using their respective standard turn systems, but they up the pace, and in my opinion, engage you more. Really, the only negative thing about the rhythm mechanic that comes to mind is that it obviously takes away that kind of slow and methodical process that's part of a traditional roguelike, but I honestly think that the constant quick decision making is refreshing, and adds a lot more depth than you might first think. Really, it comes down to how you would normally play, because even if you can't keep a beat, it has a visual indicator, so you should be fine there, and overall, I just think that this has gone on far too long. So, enemies. I feel like I used to be better at this. Alright, the enemies. They're pretty important, especially in this, because otherwise it would be a button tap fest. And even if you just had the standard skeletons, it would be a lackluster rhythm game and a terrible, just awful everything else. But there's more to it than that. There's a disproportionate amount of skeletons, I will admit, but there are other things, like golems and goblins, hellhounds, elementals, harpies, armadillos, mushrooms, slimes. May I start out starting that one? But the point was meant to be that the enemy variety is decent. Not amazing, there are a significant amount of palette swaps with just different stats, which I have never been a fan of, but the actual enemy variants all behave differently and add something fairly significant. For instance, the harpies. Well, I've never actually been hit by one of the harpies, but they leap at you, and that's kind of startling. Okay, better example, the golems. One of them is actually an exception to the stat change rule, but I really shouldn't get distracted again. The golems move fairly infrequently, only once every 4 beats, but they have a lot of health, so if one of them blocks your path at a crucial moment, any of the other enemies with more frequent attacks are going to kill you. You will die. Because that's how the enemies in this work. You have enemy sets for each stage, with tougher versions of those enemies appearing on each level of that stage. And none of those enemies individually are all that threatening. Well, with the exception of some of the mini-bosses that block the exit of each level, and of course the end stage bosses are a completely different story, but I need to use those as a setup later. Can I say that? Yeah, this show is more of a cubicle, it should be fine. See, because there's no fourth... Where was I? Right, so no single enemy is really a threat, but in groups that changes, mainly because they don't just have numbers, oftentimes at least one of them has something that messes with your movement or positioning, be it reversed controls or something else, a stun, I don't know what to call this, but it happens. Yes, well, when all of those things come together, you can get into some hectic situations. I don't know why I thought leaving that many golems alive was a good idea. It was probably because it didn't have a good weapon. That's how it's done. Me. Should've quit while I was ahead. Anyways, the weapons themselves are pretty easy to explain, which at this point is a very pleasant change. Basically, every weapon has a different attack area, ranging from the basic single tile attack of the dagger to most other reasonable attack areas you can think of, including a number of tiles running perpendicular to your attack direction, a number of tiles out past your attack direction, and others. Most of them are pretty standard. And the way you get the weapons is also pretty standard. They appear in chests, or maybe you'll find one in a shop. First, you're gonna have to buy them, though. Yeah, I see how you might think that, but no. What I'm actually saying is that you have to buy them in the lobby, so that you might be able to purchase them later. And now everything makes sense. Simply put, in the dungeons you will find gold, and you can use that gold at the in-dungeon shop. But you will also find diamonds, and you can use those at the lobby area to, among other things, unlock equipment so that it's added to the item pool and then can be found in any future dungeons. And for the weapons, as long as you unlock the base version, you also have access to any of the variants some of the weapons have. There are variants like Blood, which gives life regen after a number of kills, as well as increased damage at low health. One that deals damage based on the multiplier you get for not being terrible, one that just flat increases damage, and a few others. All of these just appear randomly, same as their standard counterparts, and sometimes you can upgrade them at shrines. As for the other things you can unlock, I'm just gonna say there's armor, there are charms, health upgrades, rings, different healing items, stuff like that, but I'm not gonna go into too much detail, mainly because I don't want to. I will, however, quickly mention the spells. There are a few of them. They recharge at a certain number of kills, although there are one-time use scrolls as well. The Fireball and Freeze spell are the most visually impactful, and we're good. I'm gonna be honest with you. I just need to remind myself that they existed. I never used them. It's not the game's fault. The spells don't have anything wrong with them. I am just very forgetful. Oh, the bosses, right. So, after you complete the 3rd level of each zone, you are taken to a boss arena, in which you know what, I'm not going to patronize you on this one. You probably know what happens at a boss arena. But what I will say is, while there are very few of them, I do like how they are all significantly different. This one's really fast paced, this one messes with the terrain, and this one's a chessboard. Still need to work on those finishers. All joking aside though, I really do like Deep Blues. I don't know why, I just do. And luckily for me, I can find them as much as I want with the boss training area, because that's all I ever used it for. Using it to actually know what the bosses you're going to do beforehand seems like cheating to me. But if you're trying to do the perfect run, because that's what apparently a lot of people do in this, sure. But for me, the game is over, because I just beat the NecroDancer, and it seems like a fitting end. As for the game as a whole, I feel like it may be a little short, but, you know, it's like I said, there are people who just... okay. I guess. Let's do that again. Melody, Candace's mother, who died, is brought back to life. And that's just swell. Also, the loot's evil, or something, I don't know. The game's story isn't exactly a huge focal point. Well, I guess now would be a good time to bring up those different character options that I had totally forgotten about, and you're not buying this in the slightest. And you know what? I like your Guile. You have really good sonic booms, just zoning them out of there. Fighting games. Anyways, yes, you can unlock different characters, and they all change things up quite a bit. I'll try to learn from my previous mistakes, and this time I'm going to start with the Bard. He makes the game play by conventional roguelike rules, entirely getting rid of the rhythm mechanics, and is overall pretty boring, in my opinion. But then you've also got people like Candace's uncle, who plays like Bomberman, Dove, who is a pacifist that can only confuse enemies, and if my experience is anything to go by, gets trapped in a lot of corners. Finally, the one that I will speak of the least, because I hate him, is the Monk. He dies when he touches gold, and I'm not a fan of that. I am, however, a fan of Melody. she plays exactly the same as normal, but can only use the loot, which attacks in all spaces around you, and is totally overpowered. It is so overpowered, in fact, that I didn't even know how King Konga was supposed to work until after I had beaten him by just mindlessly moving from left to right. In fact, honestly, I would say that I had an easier time with all 4 of the stages as her than I did with just the last stage as Candace, solely because of it. Which, it kind of made me feel a little like the loot itself. Hollow. Loots are hollow, right? But yeah, other than the loot, she plays the same as Candace. There is one other difference, though. The music, which I have ignored until this point because it's playing in the background, and I'm not a music expert, so figure it out yourselves. But in this case, I do want to mention that the main characters have different music, or rather music styles. The songs have roughly the same composition, I think. Refer to what I said previously if that's wrong. But in terms of gameplay, they have the same beats per minute, so there's no difference there. But the remixes freshen things up a bit. I like them. And even if you don't, you can add your own music in the options menu. Which, actually, that was probably what really gave away whatever that was earlier. You can rebind the keys, by the way. And normally, I just say that because I do. But in this instance, being able to change the item usage from the default multi-directional input, left and right at the same time, etc., to unique keys is nice. Or it would have been if I had done that. Because, you see, I've only complained about a weapon being too good so far, and I really need to hit my quota, so... The default item binds are stupid, and I don't like them. Yeah, I got used to it quickly, but this keyboard's not a dance pad. You've got a mode for that. I've got plenty of buttons and fingers. I want to use them. Boy, I wish that crash would have been the game and not my recording software. It really ruined everything. Alright, I think I've taken care of everything. So, let's try this again! I have now beaten the second final boss. Pretty much the same as before. I also like this boss. Not sure if the ending's still fitting. Probably is. I was not paying attention. Game length is, not as much of an issue anymore. Although, even if it was, like I was trying to say before, with the daily challenges and the level editor, it doesn't have to end if you don't want it to. You could, though. It could end if it really wanted to. She dies, and then the game ends. Don't you have a family to take care of? Fine, that's not what happens, but come on, even ignoring everything else for a moment, I have a, admittedly wholly irrational, but very intense hatred for the dagger. And you want me to deal with all these other ridiculous handicaps also? No! I tried, I failed, and I'm fine with that. I've seen everything I needed to see, so I'm just gonna wrap this up. Crypt of the NecroDancer is a very enjoyable and creative game that can be played either casually or with an obsessive fervor seldom found in an indie game that doesn't involve destructible blocks. Well, that clears a few things up. Still great though. Thanks for watching. Click over here for my last review. I reference a Capcom game in that one too. That's the only connection that I can come up with. I'm gonna leave now. Ow. Also, flying Christmas sweaters.